Hello, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Gabe Gunning, and I have the privilege of serving as your host this evening as we go on perhaps Monday Night Travel's greatest adventure ever, cycling around the globe with a very special guest. All right, now, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the show a cycling circumnavigator and outspoken activist, pun intended, and an all-around lovely human being. Please welcome to Monday Night Travel, Andrew Mortensen. Welcome to Monday Night Travel.
Hey Gabe, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we are grateful to have you. Like I said, I think this might be the greatest undertaking Monday Night Travel has taken thus far. I think we're certainly going to cover more countries than any show we've done before. But despite that, we're going to be covering a lot of countries. I'm wondering if you can share with us where exactly are you joining us from this evening?
Yeah, I'm dialing in from good old Austin, Texas. So shout out to anyone in the Lone Star State, and send my greetings to everyone else tuning in from all over the country and the world.
And we're about to learn that you are a very accomplished biker. Have you always been an enthusiastic biker?
It's a good question. I've always been a big runner, and I was sort of afraid to jump on the bike and wear the spandex shorts that are so normal among cyclists. But I found my stride. I found my stride at one point, and it led me to places I would have never imagined seeing.
All right. Well, I'm excited to get started on that tour with you. So we're just going to dive right in, or I don't know what the cycling metaphorical equivalent of diving would be. We're going to clip in. We're going to clip in. I'm ready to go. I brought my helmet. So I'll get all buckled in and I'm going to turn things over to you as we hit the road.
Amazing. Well, safety first, and as we'll learn, it's definitely paramount in a trip like this. I think it's probably helpful to give some context to the audience. I'm Andrew Mortensen. I'm 33 years old, and like I mentioned, I live in Austin, Texas. Originally from New Jersey, and grew up right in the shadow of New York City, and not right in it, but right outside of it, and that for me was a really important vantage point growing up. There's so many possibilities in that city, and it's a place for dreamers. And so this theme of kind of like dreaming big is going to come up throughout tonight, and it's come up throughout my life a little bit. But let's back up and kind of start from ground zero here. How the heck did I cycle around the world? And I'll start in a place we're all probably intimately familiar with, and that's 2020. And we were all cooped up indoors, kind of missing this connection, this human element with others, missing maybe just for all of us here, especially the excitement of jumping on an airplane and kind of jetting off somewhere new. And so we all kind of found like vices and habits to kind of fill the time, and we had to get creative, like with call it drive-by birthday parties, or Zoom happy hours, all that fun stuff. For me at the time, like I alluded to, I was actually training for a marathon, and I was supposed to run three that year. And soon enough, they all got canceled. And I was kind of running with, nobody else and real no goal in sight. And my routes around the neighborhood, they all kind of got they kind of got boring. And I kind of had to think of some way to like continue exploring it and seeing new places. And I found that the perfect outlet for that was actually getting on the bike. And it was this perfect opportunity to break outside of this bubble that I was stuck in. And so I went 20 miles, and then I went 50 miles, and then I went 100 miles, and I saw new towns and new places. And I'd found, my COVID vice, which is cycling. And at the same time, I was working for an airline, and things were not really looking so bright. And so I decided to step away and apply for grad school. And with that, I suddenly had this unexpected gap year. And so I made a list of all these things that I wanted to do, and biking across the country was first on my list. So I packed my bike and I went to uh, Nia Bay, actually just outside of Seattle, so pretty close to where the Monday night team is. And my goal was to ride from the most northwestern part of the continental US, the Pacific Ocean, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean.
And Andrew, I'm going to pop in because I want to know what else. You said you made a list of all the things you wanted to do. What did biking across the country beat out on that list?
It beat out two primary things that I can remember right now, and two things that actually would later get satisfied, albeit on the seat of a bicycle. And the second item on the list was to volunteer for a nonprofit, and then the third item on the list was to learn a new language. And so I took off and landed in Seattle and unpacked my bike, and uh, here I am in Nia Bay, about to begin this adventure east.
Good morning. It is 8:37 a.m. Pacific time on Tuesday, August 25th,
I got for
2020. I'm in Nia Bay, Washington, which is the most northwestern settlement in the lower 48. And I'll be biking from here all the way across to the East Coast, about 4,500 miles. Currently at mile.
Well, I think that's just about the flavor that we'll get for the start of the
Good
bike.
morning. It is.
Look, I took off east and it was absolutely stunning. Just beautiful landscapes throughout the US. And it was also like it is now, it was an election year. And I would ride into these really small towns around the country, and people would see me and be like, what the heck are you doing here? And they would invite me to stay. They would invite me to stay the night, just total strangers. And I would have just the best time with these people, like homemade meals, you know, ice cream, funny stories, just like staying up late, the most authentic, meaningful experiences that you could possibly have. And then I wake up the next morning, and in the sunlight of the morning, I would see what political sign that they had in their front lawn, and I would always be like, "Ah, are you kidding me?" Like, I thought, I never would have known it, and so it kind of, in some ways, like was reaffirming to me, because and it makes me really optimistic actually, because despite whatever's out there and in the media, it made me realize that, like, outside this lens of like politics and all this stuff that I thought I knew about our country, we have a lot more in common than we might all think. Um, and so I had an amazing time just meeting the most incredible people, and a highlight of which was Crazy Larry down in West Virginia. I was also learning that a bicycle is this really like valuable conversation starter. Like, I would roll into these towns and just kick off these amazing unfiltered conversations with people. I was just like chatting up a storm crossing the country. And so on the hardest day of the trip up until that point, I was climbing up Hoosier Pass in Colorado, and my legs are beat, huffing and puffing with thin altitude. And I had a realization, and that was, what if I could use my bicycle for more than just like getting from A to B, and for more than just like meeting people in an unfiltered and exciting way. What if I could use the bicycle and all of its traits? What if I could use it as a conversation starter for something greater than what it was? And in the year before I started my trip, I knew two people in my circle who had died by suicide. And I knew how big of an issue it is in our country, and especially within the LGBTQ community. And at that time as well, before my trip, I was actually volunteering for an LGBTQ nonprofit, and I learned some pretty like crazy statistics, and that's over 1.8 million LGBTQ youth seriously consider suicide every year, and it's one of the leading causes of death among young people, and it's not like four or five, it's one or two on the list, which is just blew my mind. And as someone who's gay, I had seen this impact on my community firsthand, and how youth, LGBTQ youth, are four times more likely than their peers to attempt suicide. So I decided on that day, crossing over Hoosier Pass, that I would dedicate my ride to the Trevor Project. They're an LGBTQ youth suicide prevention nonprofit. And going over that mountain, when I decided that, it gave my trip an entirely new meaning, an entirely new dimension. And so I climbed that mountain and several others on my trip east, and it sparked incredible conversations as I rode.
And Andrew, I'm wondering, can you explain a little bit how your ride kind of directly benefited the Trevor Project? What was the setup with that?
Yeah, so I raised money through an online fundraiser, and the funds went to operate their crisis hotline for 24 hours a day. So when they first started out, it was, during daylight hours or maybe until late at night. And so my contribution and the contribution of so many people who supported was going towards helping them operate their crisis hotline for 24/7. So at any time in the day, a youth could reach out and and get support. And I think that was really meaningful to know just in detail how it was helping the Trevor Project. I I kept biking, and to most viewers who have a keen eye might realize that I didn't just stop here in on the Atlantic Ocean here on the left. Um, I thought I'd be really tired, but I actually felt invigorated, and I was in the best shape of my life. I think on the picture there on the left, my legs are about three times the size that they are right now. And so I decided to continue, and I was fundraising, and it just felt great. I was meeting people and learning about our country firsthand. And so I went down to Key West, and then I hooked a hard right around Florida into the Gulf of Mexico through Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. I crossed into Texas and built my current current state where I live, and then I went towards Mexico. And at this point, I could have gone home and kind of checked off, number two and three on my bucket list, but I realized I was doing it all at once. I was indirectly kind of supporting a nonprofit, and there was just that third element, and that was to learn Spanish. So I decided to continue into Mexico, and look, I rode south, and I rode south through Central America, through Colombia, and all the countries in between, through Ecuador. I rode essentially south until there was um, there was no more road to ride. I got to a point in the south of Chile where it was just like the end of a road, and there was a lake, and so I was like, all right, I guess I gotta go home, and plus it was kind of time for grad school.
Um, well, first of all, Andrew, I love Lago O'Higgins. It manages to marry Spanish with Irish, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious, what was your lodging arrangement on this trip?
Yeah, I did everything and anything in between. I I camped outdoors. I was invited by folks to stay in their homes. On the last night of my trip, I slept on a boat. The ship crew, for a very small ferry that I had to take, about 10-minute ferry. Um, they invited me to stay the night, and so yeah, anything and everything in between hotels and hostels and um, you know, what qualifies for maybe a hostel and it was really maybe a homestay. It was, the spectrum of lodging.
And how many, I see the distances here, but how long did this take you in terms of months?
This was 8 months. And
8 months.
on for the biking nerds out there, it was on average 101 miles per day, and like the graphic says, it was 17,000 miles.
And how was that transition? Did you have, sometimes we talk about reverse culture shock. Did you have any reverse culture shock going back, not just to US culture, but also a completely different pace of life, going from biking 100 miles a day to sitting in a classroom and doing grad school?
Yeah, it was pretty shocking to me. I had avoided engaging in any type of news for those 8 months. I really just wanted to focus on the experience of being out and riding, and so I came back to a swirl of new things and a vaccine for COVID, and actually got off the plane. The first thing I did was went to the vaccine center and got a shot, and um, politics had changed and all of these things had happened. So it was a little bit of a challenge for a while just to get reacquainted. But I got thrown into the mix of business school and being able to interact with all my classmates and share some war stories from my trip and stuff actually helped me to process it and get back on my feet. I I went to University of Texas and graduated in 2023. And fast forwarding a little bit, I was ready to work. I graduated and it was time to start back and work after a little bit of a hiatus. But then I kind of hit an unexpected detour again, and maybe that was divine intervention in some ways. So I was at the airport and before starting work, I'd planned to just go on a 2-week cycling trip around Spain and France. I was always wanted to ride in the Alps and the Pyrenees. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this while I have the time. And so I had my bike packed up in a nice, neat cardboard box and walked up to the check-in counter and was about to drop my bike on the scale. And then I got a call, and it was the recruiter for the job that I had accepted. And they let me know that because of some softness in the economy, they were moving my start date out. And this was July, and they moved it from October until February. And so as one person does, is the immediate reaction for me was like, oh my gosh, like what the heck? Like what am I gonna do? Like money and job and all of this stuff. But then on the other hand, I was like, wait a second, like I'm at the airport. I'm about to go to Spain. Like, let's let's do it. Let's have some fun with this. So, I flew out to Spain, and instead of having a return ticket, I canceled it. And my plan was literally just to on the ground in Spain. I would ride until I got bored. But the only thing was I never got bored, and I ended up riding all the way to Singapore.
And so, Andrew, I know that we've talked about you having biked around the world. Can you give us what officially counts as biking around the world? Because clearly you cannot bike over an ocean. I know you're very talented, but I don't think you can even build up that speed.
I wish I could. If there was a method, I'd do it. But yeah, there's really three components. The World Ultra Cycling Association and the Guinness Book of World Records have some standards that they cover. And the first is that it has to be a single direction. So I did mine from west to east, a little bit in the first portion, northwest to southeast. The mileage requirement number two is 17,000. It has to be 17,000 miles, and mine was 27,000 miles. So definitely hit that one. And then it has to go through two antipodes. So I marked those two in orange. And antipodes are polar opposite points on Earth. So when one was in the desert of Peru and the other was in the south of Malaysia. So really just kind of I didn't realize actually I was gonna really qualify for any of this until I basically finished most of my trip. So long answer to what I thought was an easy question.
Well, I mean, amazing that the minimum requirement of miles is 17,000 and you went 27,000. So clearly you were going for more than just the record.
Yeah, right. It was beautiful, beautiful experience. Um, and I like to kind of put it in an analogy. And well, my first trip from North to South America was like cycling through like different shades of the same color, like really deep, beautiful color shades of the same color. There was two primary languages, culturally so unique and interesting. And then I compare that with my second trip, and it was like riding through a kaleidoscope. It was, 25 countries. It was 40 plus languages. And so this part of the journey was really vivid for me. And I want to, I think today give you, the highlight reel for this part of the trip because I think there are some things that we could all take with us when we travel, particularly within this region of the world that's so colorful and exciting. So things that are, as simple as how to bike in a foreign country, maybe how to embrace spontaneity in your travel, how to unearth surprises and maybe a place you didn't even know existed, and things like that. And so I'll kick off in a place that maybe we're familiar with, and that's Spain. So I started in the town of Pamplona, and I thought it was pretty befitting, like looking back on it. It's like a daring do type place. It's like where people go to tempt fate. They run away from the bulls down these narrow alleyways and they don't know how it's going to turn out. And that was kind of me on the precipice of this big trip. And so I went to the Plaza de Toros statue and this iconic statue and I kicked off my trip and within 5 minutes I was literally carrying my bike over a creek and my feet were wet and like I was like, what am I getting myself into? And ironically enough, that never happened the rest of the trip, but I made a wrong turn in the first 5 minutes and I was super comfortable. I was speaking Spanish and it was great. And that lasted for all of 4 hours because then I crossed into France and I didn't know a single word, but it was absolutely stunning. And I'll tell you a little bit about France. There's so much history. The food is incredible. And the best part was that the people there are just so like connected. I feel like in some places there's a lot of phones and distractions, but like in France, I felt like this sense of connectedness with people because everyone was so eager to like just socialize, and I loved this experience there where I got to meet so many people. I stayed with several families and just met um, wonderful people, and also the just the beauty of the French countryside. Any time that there was a mountain, I cycled up it, and I took the literally the hilliest route possible. And so I zigzagged throughout the Pyrenees and the Alps, and because I'm not going to miss like this gorgeous scenery, and it was just stunning and a place that lives on in my memory very vividly. The other cool thing about biking in France and maybe is less talked about is this like cycling culture. And sometimes on weekends, in fact, they would have photographers set up and they would have drinks and food, and people would be literally be standing on the side of the road cheering like recreational cyclists up these mountains. And I thought, like, is there a race or something? Like, what's going on? And no, this is just like a normal Saturday in the Alps. And so these folks were cheering me on, and they gave me some food and some water. Like, it's just a really fun communal experience. And this was one of the photographers, and
Oh, so they would take a picture of you, and then later on, they'd have another stop where you could scan the barcode and like buy your photo.
Exactly,
Oh,
exactly.
that's so, I was wondering how you got all these scenic photos.
Yeah. Like €5 or something. You send it on Venmo, and then you can download the full image.
Huh.
It was fun, and they're always positioned in the best spots, so
Hmm.
they know where to be. Um, I think that another interesting part of cycling there was just a great like diversity of cyclists, and we see like there were people who were pretty serious about it, like this guy on the left, and probably riding a bike that's like $15,000. No joke, like very expensive bikes. And then there were people kind of out on like their day-to-day cruisers, kind of just enjoying the scenery, um, having fun, and so it made me realize that like there's this broad spectrum of folks who are biking in France and in Europe writ large, and which led me to like think about if I was to like recommend to my friends or to my parents like how to go and bike abroad. I thought of like several things that I would want to imbue in them. And I think the first thing is that you don't need a bike to go and ride a bike abroad. And that might be paradoxical, but there are rental options everywhere. And you can get anything from this $10,000 road bike all the way down to a comfortable cruiser that has relaxed handlebars and a step through frame and maybe a little basket for your snacks. Uh, I think anyone and everyone can rent a bike. But if you don't want to rent a bike, you can also bring one. And the rules with airlines are more lenient now than they were ever. And so they're now a lot of airlines are allowing you to take a bike in lieu of one checked bag, or sometimes it's even free. And also like trains and buses are really accommodating for bikes and especially in Europe. And you could ride for 5 minutes, or you can ride for 5 hours. Like a lot of people just had a bike rack on the back of a rental car and kind of just picked and choose where they wanted to go. And some people didn't like mountains, so they would take the car up, and then they would just ride down. So like, there's really no right or wrong way to go about doing this, and you could just set out and do it however it feels comfortable. I think the most important thing on the list is probably like safety. It was always like the top thing on my list. And there's things that you'd probably expect, like, hey, use a tail light or use a headlight or wear like really bright clothing and a helmet like you had on, Gabe, earlier. But so other things that were maybe like less evident are are threefold. The first is mountain roads are actually like a little bit safer than I found than like cities and flat roads, because I found like the drivers were actually locked in and always paying attention. And I also use Google, like Google Street View and Google Satellite View, to kind of assess where the road pavement would be good, where there was a lot of truck traffic, or looking at the speed limit sign. So there's ways to like get ahead of is this road safe? Is this area good for bikers? Just try to get like a pulse beforehand. And which leads me to my third point, and that's just like culturally, every place has a pulse. And so try to get a grasp of that before you arrive, whether that's on Reddit or just talking to people, or even in the taxi when you land at the airport. Just try to look around and see how drivers are interacting. And I think the other thing I'm asked about a lot is like, oh, well, how do you like plan a route to a place that you've never been? And I used a program called Komoot, and I'll go back a slide just to show the spelling. And then I also use Strava. They have like a heat map function that shows where millions of people have ridden their bike. So it's all crowdsourced data, and it's really helpful. So I rode, and as we all know, I kept riding east, and I went through Switzerland. This is Passo Stelvio, going from Switzerland into Italy. I rode through Slovenia and into Croatia, and just incredible. Went through all the other Balkans as well, Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia. Then I made it to the ocean, and then I was in Greece, and then I was on the footsteps of Turkey. which turned out to be probably one of the most enjoyable 3 weeks of my trip. I spent like an inordinate amount of time planning my route in Turkey. Usually I would kind of just go with the flow and ask people, hey, like, where should I go? And just take it day by day. But Turkey was the biggest country that I would ride through up until that point. So I really wanted to be, intentional about where I was going. I knew there was this like really rich experience waiting to be unlocked. And so a lot of people opt for this northern route through um, on a pretty busy highway, but I wanted to go through the heartland of Turkey from southwest to northeast on roads with really no cars, and kind of a sample of what that ended up looking like. Like Turkey to me was the perfect place to ride a bike. It was just like all a balance of all of these attributes that you want while you're cycling, but also while you're traveling. Like the roads were in fantastic condition everywhere you went. The drivers were super respectful. Like prices were reasonable. People were, I've said this so many times, it's going to become a cliche, but they were amazing. In fact, I was invited for tea everywhere I went. And if I had accepted every single invite, I would still be in Turkey today, like full stop. There were UNESCO sites everywhere, like just absolutely wild. And I think this experience in Turkey, uh, a lot of like moments stand out, but there were a few like special moments that really stood out to me, and just some of the people and the experiences. But I actually had an opportunity to see the whirling dervishes in Konya, and I think just before I get there, I have to add that I don't think any trip to Turkey would be complete without trip to Cappadocia. So absolutely one of the prettier places that I saw there. But yeah, so I had heard about these whirling dervishes when I was a kid, and I saw them in a movie, and I always been really fascinated by, and wanted to see them. And then one morning I woke up and I realized that this town named Konya was on my route, and I was like, Konya, that kind of rings a bell. Like, isn't that where the dervishes perform? So I did a quick Google, and it was like, yeah, like they perform, but it's only one day a week on Saturdays. And I was like, wait, like today's Saturday. Oh my gosh. But the only thing was I was 106 miles away, and it was like, 10 o'clock in the morning. So I had essentially 8 hours to ride this 106 miles before I could get to Konya. So I cranked all day, battling winds and ran a few red lights and like just cranking out. But I arrived 2 minutes before the show, and they let me put my bike right next to the metal detector and walk in as I was, and just a really incredible experience to see the whirling dervishes live. I think at this point I was learning a lot about spontaneity, and however hard that you plan out your day, something will eventually inevitably change once you hit the road. This day I had the potential to go see the whirling dervishes, and that was enough to totally upend my plan, and it was justification to like just crank all day. It was probably the hardest ride that I experienced in my trip, but it was making me realize like I was okay with two outcomes, right? The first was making it, and the second was not. And maybe that's a lesson for all of us as we travel, that learning to be comfortable with multiple scenarios. Maybe there's like room for some unknowns in your travel, and space to kind of stumble into the most you know incredible, beautiful thing. And I think example of that is is Kamalak Canyon in central Turkey. It's absolutely stunning. So, how this practically comes out in maybe a trip that you take is maybe on a road trip. You see a cultural site and you didn't even know it existed. Take a turn and go see it. Or maybe it's as simple as adding days in your itinerary that you don't have anything at all scheduled and you kind of just feel it out.
And Andrew, I'm curious, you talked so wonderfully about going through Turkey. Are there any places that you experienced in Turkey that maybe non-biking travelers wouldn't necessarily be aware of, but would really enjoy, perhaps if they have a car?
Yes, yeah, actually, this place right here, it's Kamalak Canyon. This road around the canyon took almost over 100 years. Somebody will have to fact check me, but I think it was over 100 years to build this road, and it carves through portions of it are higher than the Grand Canyon, and it's absolutely stunning. And at the end of the road is a UNESCO town, and there was no one there. It was probably the coolest, most undiscovered place I'd visited. And at the moment that I went through, it was actually closed because of a landslide. But they put a cardboard or a wooden plank over the gap, and I was able to wheel my bicycle and go over the gap. So it's open now for car traffic, and
Hmm.
100% would recommend it. Now I'm getting east, Gabe, and there's an option. I had to go through Iran, or I had to go through Russia, or I could take a boat. And I went with the third option, decided to take a boat from Azerbaijan to Kazakhstan.
Well, I'm glad you gave your legs a rest for a few days when you
Yeah,
did
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Hmm.
And it was this, 1980s Soviet era rusty old cargo ship that sometimes takes passengers if there's room, and just a really fascinating few days on the trip. And the boat leaves when it's full. It only sails when there's good weather, and if there's not good weather, you kind of just drop an anchor wherever you are and you wait. And so it was supposed to be a 14-hour sailing, and um, it turned into 3 days of sitting on this boat that was in questionable condition. And I'll show you some the water here, because just to give you like a little bit of an overview of what we were dealing with. But super amazing people. I was on the boat with these mostly truck drivers, and there were folks from Russia, there was folks from Ukraine, from Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, all these stands, and we had just the best time. And I would 100% recommend it.
How did you find out about this boat, Andrew? And is it something that other travelers could find, like going on a cargo ship if they want a more rustic experience?
I like that term. It was definitely rustic. Yeah, it took a lot of local asking around. Hey, where's the ship dock? Like, oh, when is the boat gonna leave? Like, oh, how do I get to the dock? And like, where do I go through customs and passport? And how do I buy the ticket? Can I buy it online? Like, there was a lot of things that I just had to figure out in person while I was there. And maybe some space for spontaneity and like excitement. But I think it's one of those things that you get there and figure it out on the ground, so to say.
Rick likes to joke that his first book was called Europe Through the Back Door, and he likes to joke that before writing that book, he did Europe Through the Gutter. That seemed a little bit like a Europe Through the Gutter experience
Yeah,
in the
that's
most positive way possible.
yeah, yep, yep. And kind of like I alluded to, like there was no schedule, and so I was asleep, and suddenly the boat just bumped, and they made an announcement essentially saying like, "Get off the boat, we're here," and it's 3 a.m. It's like it was dark, uh, and they just dumped us off at customs, and so I didn't really know where to go. It was dark, so I took a nap in the building right next to the dock, and when I woke up, well, I was in like an entirely different world. It was barren, it was deserted, and there were camels.
Huh.
Like I was, where am I? Like, how did I get here? And it brought me to this notion of like place lag, and there's jet lag, but there's notion of like place lag where everything is just like thrown at you, and it's so new and novel. And it happens a lot, Gabe, when like we get off an airplane into a new country, and it's like, wow, like the smells, the sounds, the sights. I think this boat trip, even though it was like really small dot on my trip, it totally reframed my sense of time and how slowly things move on the bike. You get to see the landscape around you unfolding inch by inch. And I definitely saw a lot of inches of desert on this trip.
Hmm. So kind of the shift and the boat ride made you realize how gradually the shifts had been happening up to that point.
Yeah, yeah. And it made me realize like I gotta pinch myself sometimes. Like I'm in another country, like I'm biking, there's just camels, there's horses, like you gotta almost gotta like wake up every once in a while. So there was definitely a you know uh wake up moment for me.
And
Uh,
how long in advance did you plan where you were going to be staying and which places? I know you said you mostly would plan on the fly aside from Turkey, but how far in advance would you plan?
yeah. I think I would I would plan 2 weeks in advance. I would pick a point, and then every night before I would plan out where I wanted to go the next day. And it took a lot of research and a lot of you know digging in, but um, that's kind of how I did it, and uh, so it led to some surprises, but also I had some level of detail for where I wanted to be in 2 weeks. Um, so I think I got through Kazakhstan and these amazing people, and I got in the doorstep of Uzbekistan. And I think it was probably the most like surprisingly delightful place that I ended up riding through, but that I didn't even know when I started. I had no expectations. The first few days, I was again in desert, and it was really wet and muddy, and there was really not a whole lot else for a few days. And it was pretty lonely out there. And one day, I came across a workers' camp in the middle of the desert, and the sun was setting and it was getting cold. So they were like, "Hey, like, come stay the night at the worker camp." So I arrived at this small little building, and I went inside, and it was warm, and there was vodka, and there was copious amounts of food on the table, and it was a little girl's birthday. And so we danced and sang and had a lot of fun until the vodka bottle was empty, and I retreated to the bed, and there were essentially barracks with a bunch of bunk beds, and they were like, "Hey, this one's free, go take it." And climbed to the top bunk, and underneath me there's a pretty large gentleman who was totally had no clothes on whatsoever except for very, very tight small underwear. And he was belching and burping and snoring, and it just made me realize, like, laying on the top bunk there, that like, I didn't even know this place existed. I didn't even think I would stumble upon it. Like if you looked on a map and tried to find it, you wouldn't be able to find it. And when you're on the bike, you really find yourself in some remote swaths. And I always thought in my head, like, dang, I am in the middle of nowhere right now. But then I realized, like, maybe the framing was better. Like, you're always in the middle of somewhere, and it's somewhere important and meaningful, especially for the people who call it home. And right there in the desert, in that moment, it was the best possible place that I could be.
Andrew, I'm curious. It so often when we kind of give our travel logs, whether it's a formal presentation as you're doing, or just if we're chatting with people about our trips after we get home, we naturally just want to focus on the highlights and the positives, and the things that we learned. But I always think it's important to acknowledge that when we travel, Rick always says travel is life intensified. And that means that it can have higher highs, but it can also have lower lows. And you mentioned a few lonely days there in kind of the barren side of Uzbekistan. How did you handle things not going to plan, or, some times of loneliness or difficulty during these long journeys?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to phrase it. It was stressful at times, like not having food or knowing what was ahead. I got robbed once in the North to South America portion. Got ill a few times, got bed bugs, like all these things that situations you couldn't even make up to. Like I during COVID was had to cross a border, and I was on my bike, and they're like, no. you can't come in on the land border, but what you can do is leave your bike here and go take an airplane and come back. Like you can get on a plane with 180 other people during COVID versus like just cycling through alone, camping outdoors. Like anyway, so in all honesty, like in these moments, you kind of just have to like have a third person view and like just like laugh. And so I think like taking that skill with me to to now like just sometimes things are so crazy and absurd, you just laugh at it. And especially in retrospect, you can look back on it.
And I'm also curious, part of this whole journey, in addition to exploring new places, is this purpose that you found in using your bike to raise money for the Trevor Project and to continue that fundraising project. And it seems like you made all these great person-to-person connections, and yet you're also traveling through places where, I don't know about any one individual person, but statistically speaking, most of these people probably would not necessarily be understanding or tolerant or accepting of you as a gay person. So, how did you navigate that, and what did it feel like to travel through these places, knowing that you would not have the same rights that you do here in the US?
It's a great question. I think, I'll be the first to acknowledge that like I'm privileged in the fact that, I'm white, I'm cisgender, I'm masculine percent, like all these things that might make it difficult for um, different people. And so, but this trip was definitely harder in that respect. I had to really cage what I said, being careful, I have a partner, not a boyfriend, but I never lied. And in fact, from my first trip, it was all over the internet, like social media, fundraising. I never hid my Instagram or Facebook or anything. And so some people would actually see it and they'd be like, hey, like, are you gay? Or they would see it and not say anything. And they'd still invite me to dinner or to stay the night. And so it kind of reframed my perspective again. And like that maybe it's better out there than we all think. So I'm in Uzbekistan and I I was continuing on through just crazy experiences that again alluding to what I said earlier, you can't even make up. I ended up at a wedding and gave a speech to about 500 people in Bukhara. I went past these incredible ornate buildings of Islamic architecture, these madrasas and mosques and minarets, and felt like a celebrity because people were, stopping to take pictures of me. And then in Samarkand, I went through the Rajasthan Square, and it's this epic place with this triumvirate of madrasas, and it's really really pretty when the lights come on. I even made a wrong turn at one point and ended up in a town I didn't think I would be in, and the town's English teacher came to me. He was like, "No problem, come have a meal with us, come stay the night." And he was invited me to his class the next morning to go talk with his students, and so I got to give them a little lesson, and I decided to teach them what the word adventure meant to me.
And what did you tell them?
I said like, you know, kind of realizing that everyone has different circumstances around travel, and I said like, adventure is as simple as going to a new place and challenging yourself to look at it in a new way,
Hmm.
and in some similar words. So it was incredible though in Uzbekistan, really just wonderful people. I think we'll get a video.
Hello to USA from Uzbekistan, yeah?
Just a
Aw.
wonderful experience. And looking through these pictures now, I'm just getting emotional, remembering all these details here. The food in Uzbekistan, I don't know why Central Asia gets a bad rap, but like it was great. Like it was awesome. I had like unlimited amounts of this really good meat, this bread they call naan. I even got to try horse meat, which was surprising and tastes a lot like bacon. Um, Uzbekistan it's definitely a place I want to go back to someday. And so I'm riding east and get to Kyrgyzstan and then cross into China and boy did I know I had biked far when I got to China. It was where west meets east, and here I was, and it was absolutely beautiful.
Oh, wow.
And I just so happened to meet a photographer this day who was on the side of the road and took some pictures and crossed into Pakistan and the mountains and amazing, incredible people. And crossed into India at Wagah border, where some of you might be familiar. There's a border closing ceremony every night with elaborate dancing and all sorts of fun activities. And I got to Nepal and then went back into India for a brief moment, and I had to skip Myanmar, unfortunately, because of an ongoing conflict. So that was the first time I took my bike wheels off the ground and had to skip a country, but it'll be there for for another day. And then I got to Malaysia and I got to Singapore, and there were my parents waiting at the end, and it was an incredible experience. So I crossed in total, I think it was 27,000 miles in 37 countries, and I raised about $20,000 for the Trevor Project.
Wow. What was the feeling like after? And I mean, like you said, by traveling slowly, the changes happen more gradually, but it still must have felt kind of bizarre arriving in this almost futuristic place like Singapore after having been like at these work camps in the middle of the desert. What was that feeling like as you rolled into Singapore?
It was the most like optimistic, exciting moment of my life. Like you said, I seen a lot of different versions of life, and then I saw like this really impeccable, like futuristic vision of what humankind can do. And it was like just like wow, like look at this. Like this is so cool. And it left it ended the journey on a really good note because it was uh like I had found so many other places in the US in this second phase of the trip as well that I just feel really optimistic about our world.
Mm. Well, it's a lovely picture of you with your parents. I love that they got you the Globe beach ball.
Yes, yes. That was a nice touch, and um, I have it displayed prominently now in my family room. I think when I look back on trip, Gabe, like just kind of rehashing like some of the high points is really like five things. And the first is like just that spontaneity aspect and like just letting things go to the wayside sometimes. Like it's okay. And the second thing is that there's a lot to see between the airports and all the railways that we the rail stations, and you're always in the middle of somewhere. So take the land route and add a few stops. And the third thing is just take it one day at a time. I didn't know I was gonna ever bike around the world. I just kind of strung together a lot of bike rides that eventually connected into an around the world trip. And then I think the fourth thing is just remember to pinch yourself sometimes because place lag is real. And as I alluded to just before, the fifth thing that I would want to leave everyone with here is just an extreme sense of optimism. And there's a lot going on in our world. And I think we look in the world at there's like the 99% of things that are happening in the world. We spend 99 or the one sorry, let me rephrase that. The 1% of things happening in our world, we spend 99% of our time focused on. But in reality, like it should be swapped. Like 99.9% of the people in the world are amazing and safe and human and loving. And I hope that you can all go out and explore it some more.
All right. Well, Andrew, Thank you so much for taking us on that journey around the world. I mean, you gave me glimpses of places that, like you said, I almost never think about. I mean, and I'm somebody who I think thinks internationally quite a bit, and getting into all those stands are just places I don't have any mental image of. So it was so fun to see those photos and to see those people. And I especially liked your concept of always being in the middle of somewhere and somewhere that's important to other people. Um, Normally, at this point, before we transition into our Q&A, which we'll do in just a moment, Ben's been collecting a lot of questions from our viewers. But we typically have a word from our sponsor, and usually that is some product or resource from all of us here at Rick Steves Europe. But today, I didn't even tell you I was going to do this. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you can give us one more plug for the Trevor Project. We've linked to your Trevor Project fundraising page for anybody that might be interested in learning more about what they do or potentially donating if it's an issue that really moves them. But can you just tell us once more what a donation to the Trevor Project does?
Yeah, Gabe, I appreciate that opportunity. They are they transcend disagreement in this country. And when I wore my orange Trevor Project t-shirt around, people they can agree at some level. They may not agree in the details, but like up here, everyone agreed that nobody should feel like they don't have a right to live. And so it transcends disagreement. It is the most incredible organization that I've ever encountered in my life. And for that reason, I support them, and the funds that I'm raising will continue to go towards supporting their mission and saving young LGBTQ lives. And so I hope that in the least all of you here can read about their mission and become more familiarized, because you never know when someone close to you might need help.
Well, thank you very much for bringing that awareness and doing it in such an epic way. There are certainly much easier ways to raise money than to bike 27,000 miles, but we got a great travelogue out of it, so I'm not complaining. Um, we're going to move on to some questions. Understandably, we have a lot of people that are fascinated about the logistics of your trip, and especially some gearheads out there, it sounds like. We have Joanna that would like to know what kind of bike you were riding.
Yes, that's a great question. And it's a Surly long haul trucker. And it is the like premier bicycle for long range riding. And that's because I'm not sponsored by them. I'm not getting there's no affiliate links here, but it's just a very comfortable bike. And cyclists say steel is real, meaning you can ride over bumps and undulations in the pavement and you won't feel a single thing. And so that was the bike that I used, and it held up for 27,000 miles, no major issues. And um, again, for the cyclists, I used a tubeless tire system, and that led in my trip to, I mean, it's crazy to think about, but in 27,000 miles, I got three flat tires.
Wow. How many, well, Douglas was also asking how many did you go through any tires just in terms of like wearing them down?
Yeah. I burned them basically to the ground. I had to, as well as the additional weight on the bike from my equipment would make the tires wear quicker. And so they were like pretty high performance road tires, and they would really just wear out pretty quick. So I would replace my tire on average once every 1,000 miles. So I went through 27 to 30 tires this trip.
Wow. And were you able to get tires in these foreign countries, or did you have to like bring them with you?
I did a lot. Yeah, there was the movie Shawshank Redemption. There's a character, and his name is Red, and he says like, "Oh man, that's known to get stuff." And I met like a Red in every country. I'd be like, "Hey, like I need 32 millimeter, 700 cc tubeless tires, Continental GP 5000, and they'll be like, got you. And 2 weeks later, there'll be a package waiting for me at the, you know, 10 days down the road. And so I kind of had to plan out the logistics. I took some tires with me. Um, I had a friend that I met in Croatia. He also brought stuff out for me. So there's just a little bit stringing together a lot of different sources.
Well, speaking of, meeting these people and being able to coordinate that, I know also you had mentioned at one point, I don't think you mentioned this, but you were asked to give like a toast at that girl's birthday party, and then also gave a wedding speech at one point at a wedding in Uzbekistan. Um, how did you handle, obviously you learned a lot of Spanish on your first trip, but going through 40 different languages and your second trip, what strategies did you develop for communicating with people, even when you didn't really even have a hope of learning the language?
That's a great question, and visuals go a long way. So pointing and being really emphatic, and then just the technology we have nowadays is just unbelievable. And so I pre-downloaded languages as I went, and I still have them on my phone. I think I have like over 45 languages
Hmm.
downloaded on my phone, like anything from Uyghur to Assamese to French, Spanish. And so I think like just being really prepared with knowing where you're going to go, even if you don't have internet, just um, downloading languages beforehand.
And would you use like Google Translate for that? Okay. Yeah, Google
Exactly.
Translate is one of the apps that always makes me feel like I'm living in the future. It's
Yeah. Yep.
incredible.
Yep. Absolutely incredible.
Going back to the bike itself, Michael wanted to know, did you ever have any mechanical issues with your bike, and how did you prepare for those?
Michael, the biggest issues that I had with the bike were just with tires, like those like three times that the tires pop. But it was more in my head than anything. It was more like an anxiety throughout the trip about my bicycle because you're in these really remote places. And in Chile, at one point, it was 100 miles like before I saw any other human, like any other store, whatever. Like if my tire blows out there, like what the heck? Um, so thankfully I didn't have any like major like blowouts or just big bike problems. But the closest thing I could think of to bike issue was in India when I was just cycling along the road and my whole left crank just suddenly fell off and there was pieces all over the road and had to go pick them up. And in India, there's 4G cell service all around the country. And so I was like, oh my gosh, YouTube, like how to reassemble crank. And so like I stopped on the side of the road and all these kids are gathering around and I'm like fixing it and thankfully got it back working. But Michael, to your question, like just stay ahead of the repairs. And I think that you'll avoid any of those blowouts. And that's what I did. Every time there was a bike shop that had any sort of advanced service, I did it, and I just got my bike cleaned and oiled and re-greased at every opportunity that I could.
And that you had also mentioned to me, I think that you had a satellite phone just in case of emergencies, right?
Yeah, I had
Okay.
a Garmin communicator so that at any moment I could just hit the button and hopefully there'd be help. I used it one time, and I used it one time in the south of Chile where there was no cell service in the very remote area of Patagonia, and there was a car accident. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wasn't involved, but I pressed the button, and within 12 minutes, there was an army truck there, and that brought a few people to the hospital. So it was like just incredible having
Oh,
that
wow.
capability.
Um, Switching from your bike to your most important equipment, your body, Susan wants to know, how did you stay fueled when you were just burning through calories faster than your tires?
Yeah, Susan, the fun part about the trip was like being in all these countries and not having any like guilt. The French bakeries were probably the most memorable culinary experience of my life. Like every small town, like pizza, croissants, like muffins, like just eating my way across. There were places that were less abundant too, and really having to like think ahead. And I always had like a sleeve of dry biscuits or cookies or something. But there were some times when I didn't really eat for many hours, and I think after a while I was in I was in good shape, and your body runs like more efficient. So I was able to go farther and further with less towards the end of my trip. I think another sort of unspoken um, aspect of like keeping the body sort of tuned is like stretching and um, really just like listening to any aches and pains in the body. And for 20 minutes every single night, I would stretch like religiously. I brought a stretching band, like a yoga band, despite having like nothing else on my bike, one pair of underwear, one t-shirt, and then my biking clothes. Like that was it. I had a stretch band, and it was like a godsend because every night I would take 20 minutes to really loosen my body for the next day.
And we also have Steve is wondering, how did you plan for the weather? And were there any days that you ended up needing to change your plans just because Mother Nature had other ideas for your day?
The best part of biking when I did, and maybe this is a little bit of like hindsight, and but it was in north to south. I biked from fall into summer in South America and then into fall again. So the weather was like super temperate the entire time. And same with Europe to Asia. I did July and I was biking essentially through fall. And then by the time I got through into Pakistan and India, it was warm again. Um, Ironically, the most extreme weather that I experienced occurred in a span of one day in Wyoming. And that was when the temperature suddenly dropped to like 15 degrees. There was a squall or something rolled in. It started just snowing, and I was getting blown off my bike. And I came on this really small town. I was like, that's it. Like I can't ride anymore. It was the first time and the only time in my trip that I had to stop because of weather. And then literally 2 days later, I was in, I think, Idaho, and the temperature was 102 or 110 degrees, like something absurd. So never had experienced anything above or below that in those 2 days in Wyoming. The rest of the trip was, I got a handful of days, when you get soaked through to through, but the rest of the trip, I got pretty darn lucky with weather.
Um, I'm wondering, Andrew, just a couple more questions. I love how you were able to use your travels. Of course, in some ways, you said you did it to achieve your own goals, right? You did it um, to bike across the country, which was a life goal of yours, to fulfill your goal of volunteering for a nonprofit, to learn a language. And I think that we should travel for ourselves, but I think oftentimes in life, the best things that we can do are mutualistic, things that are fulfilling both for us and serve others. And I love that you did that in a very tangible way through your fundraiser, but also by really connecting with people. And what would maybe be kind of your parting advice for others who want to adventure and do it in a way that is both good for them and serves others?
I think of an analogy again. I'm big on analogies, but like biking through, you know, wherever all these this crazy distance, it was kind of like um the accelerant in like a fire. So I had like a campfire and then like I'm dumping lighter fluid on it and it's like really getting big. Like I had this idea, this like core sort of desire to go and cycle and see these places. But dang, when I started like fundraising and when the stories rolled in and I started meeting people, it was just like took on an entirely new dimension. So the advice I would give is like find something that you're passionate about and then like just layer it on. And maybe there's interplay between the two things.
Mhm. And there's a lot of ways to do that that don't require 27,000 miles of biking. Opportunities to do, you know, visits to nonprofits and things around causes that you might be passionate about abroad. So I love that. I love your pyrotechnic analogy. And the last question that I have for you, Andrew, just comes from me. I noticed both as we were working on this and then during your presentation tonight that a common theme, as you said, was just how incredible the people were. And I'm wondering, what lessons do you think that Americans can learn from the people you encountered? And I guess I think especially of the people that I think about Europe a lot. I don't think about Central Asia and Uzbekistan and um, Kazakhstan as much. What do you think Americans can learn from some of those places that we're maybe not as aware of?
I think what comes to mind is like the 99% stat that I pulled out of thin air, but which may or may not be true. But like most people in the world like are genuine and caring. I think on a bicycle, it really gets exasperated because they see this person like, what are you doing? Like it's 35 degrees out and it's 8 o'clock at night. Like, please come and have dinner with me. But even like as a general traveler, um, like people that I've met in these places are just incredible. And when there's sometimes anxiety around news coverage or stories, but again, that's like the point. That's like the 0.01%. Like there's still 99.9% underneath that are there. They're incredible. So to answer the question, I think it's just keeping that top of mind, that most places you go and most people you interact with will be very nice and trustworthy and it'll be safe and fun. So I think that would
Well,
be, yeah.
as Rick says, he always likes to talk about travel as getting to know the neighbors. And that once you do so, you become less afraid of other people. And so I am more likely to, build bridges instead of walls. And so I really thank you for taking this time to share your journey with us and to help us kind of vicariously through you get to know a few more of our neighbors around the world. So thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us, and happy future rides.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabe, for having me, and thank you to the Monday Night Travel team. It's been awesome.
All right, and thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. As a reminder, next week we are going to go to Iceland with both Rick and Cameron. It is going to be a very exciting show. We're looking forward to it. Again, a reminder, it will be a slightly longer show than usual, so get a nap in if you need it. So thank you all again, and we hope to see you next week.